The grand meeting hall aboard the flagship Majestic was silent, except for the murmurs of the alien representatives gathered from all across the galaxy. Humans had arrived late to the galactic stage, and their sudden rise in power was drawing attention. The Galactic Council, a powerful assembly of the most influential species, had decided to invite them to a meeting. But there was one problem. Not everyone was happy about humanity's arrival. Some species, like the Xerians, believed that the galaxy had already been divided among the powerful races and that no new contenders were needed. One of the most vocal representatives of the Xerian people was Six, a tall, striking alien with an air of superiority. She had a long history of mocking weaker species. Her species, the Xerians, had been at the top for centuries. They had conquered countless planets and wiped out anyone who dared to challenge their dominance. Six, like many of her kind, was sure that the humans would soon fade away, a fleeting speck in the vastness of the universe. She stood at the podium, her voice smooth but dripping with condescension. She was speaking to the assembly, making sure the humans felt the sting of her words. "Humans are nothing," she said, her tone sharp as a blade. "They're like insects, scattered, weak, and easily crushed. You cannot hope to match the power of the Xerians or any of the galaxy's true rulers. You will fall, just like the countless species that thought they could stand against us." The room was filled with nods of agreement from the other alien representatives. Six's words were harsh, but no one was surprised. The Xerians had long been the most powerful species in the galaxy, and they didn't take kindly to newcomers. James Harding, a young human officer, stood near the back of the room. He was there as part of the human delegation. His role was to observe, to speak if needed, and to show the galaxy that humanity was serious about their place in the galaxy. Despite Six's words, he didn't move. He kept his face calm, betraying no emotion. His dark eyes never left Six as she continued to belittle his species. James wasn't angry. He wasn't even upset. He had faced worse challenges before, and he knew that a single human could make a difference, no matter how small the odds. But that didn't mean he would sit quietly while Six made her point. Six wasn't finished. With a smug grin, she stepped forward, looking down at James as if he were beneath her. Her voice carried a mocking edge. "You think you can stand up to us? You don't even understand how wars are fought," she sneered. "I've seen civilizations rise and fall, and the humans? They'll be gone in a century at best. You're all nothing more than a passing phase." There was a cold edge to her words now, a challenge. She had set her sights on James, and she was determined to break him, to make sure the humans felt small in the face of the galaxy's true powers. Without warning, Six took a step closer and, with an arrogant flick of her wrist, she spat in James's direction. The spit landed a few inches from his feet and the room went deathly silent. It wasn't just a gesture of disdain, it was a direct insult. The message was clear. Six believed she had humiliated him, that she had made a mockery of the human race. She expected him to react, to show some sign of weakness. She was ready to see him lose control, to show that humans, despite their bravado, were nothing more than creatures that could be toyed with. But James stood still, unmoving. His face was impassive, his hands at his sides, his posture strong and steady. The room waited for him to snap, for him to show anger, or perhaps for him to bow his head in shame. But James simply stared at Six, his eyes locked with hers. He wasn't angry, he wasn't embarrassed, he was something far more dangerous than that. He was in control. Six stood tall, her expression filled with pride, as if she had just won a battle with words alone. She had crossed the line without hesitation, believing that her actions were not only justified but necessary. The Xerians had always used fear and insults to keep others beneath them. Now, with the whole council watching, she had chosen James as her target. Her sharp eyes locked onto him, and a crooked smile spread across her face. She saw no reason to stop. Her voice turned colder, louder, and even more insulting. "Do you even know how to fight?" she asked, mocking him openly. "We've crushed empires, silenced rebellions, and shattered species stronger than yours. What have humans done? Built little ships and acted like you belong here?" Her words echoed across the hall, bouncing off the cold metal walls like knives. The delegates from other alien races didn't say a word. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious. No one dared to interrupt Six. Her reputation for turning debates into destruction was well known. And still, James remained still. His face showed no emotion. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, and didn't shift. It was as if her words were falling into empty space, never reaching him. That silence seemed to annoy her more than any argument would have. She stepped down from the podium slowly, her heels clicking against the polished floor, each step deliberate. She walked across the room toward James with her head held high and her chin tilted with arrogance. As she reached him, she stood just a few feet away. The council watched silently. Tension spread like fire. Six leaned in slightly, her voice now quieter but filled with venom. "You think silence makes you powerful? You think standing still makes you strong?" Her golden eyes narrowed. "I've ended warriors braver than you. You're just a child in a world too big for you to understand." And then, with no warning at all, she spat again, closer this time, right at his boots. The wet sound echoed, louder than any speech before it. The act was not just disrespect, it was a direct challenge. In Xerian culture, spitting was used only for one reason, to declare superiority. Doing it twice meant total humiliation. Her species would have seen it as the ultimate insult. To her, this was victory. She had proven in her mind that humans were weak and unworthy. Her body language screamed confidence, like she had crushed him without touching him. She expected him to crack, to react, to show anything that made her feel like she still had control. But what followed was something no one in the room expected. James didn't speak. He didn't yell or argue. His calmness remained. He slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. His expression didn't change. No anger, no fear. Just a steady gaze, clear and cold. The energy in the room shifted. It was small. At first, hard to notice, but real. Six's confident grin faded slightly. She had crossed the line again, but the reaction she wanted still hadn't come. And that scared her more than she understood. The council remained frozen. No one moved. Even the guards, who were trained to break up violent situations, didn't know what to do. They were waiting for something, anything. But all they saw was a human officer, calm as a statue, standing before one of the most feared voices in the galaxy and not breaking. That silence, that calm, suddenly, it felt louder than anything, Six had said. And though no one knew it yet, the countdown to something unforgettable had already begun. The silence in the room grew heavier, more intense with each passing second. Six's face twisted in confusion as she realized James wasn't reacting the way she had expected. This wasn't the helpless human she had pictured. She had humiliated him, insulted him, and spat on him twice. Yet, he stood there perfectly still, not even a hint of emotion showing on his face. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. What kind of human was this? She was used to seeing species crumble under her words, to see their faces flush with anger or fear. But James wasn't like the others. He simply stared back at her, his posture unwavering, his eyes unblinking. It was as if he was waiting for something, as though she had walked into his trap without even realizing it. She didn't know what to make of it. For a moment, she was thrown off balance. Was this human foolishly ignoring her, thinking that silence would somehow save him? Or was there something else? A strange unease began to gnaw at her. The room remained frozen. The other delegates, who had watched Six with such rapt attention, now shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't out of fear, but out of uncertainty. They, too, had expected James to crumble under the pressure. They had expected him to react, defend himself, shout, get angry. But instead, they saw a human who seemed unaffected. Six's confidence began to waver. She took a step back, still trying to maintain her superiority, but the damage was done. The power dynamic in the room had shifted ever so slightly. James still hadn't moved. He was just standing there, silently, his gaze locked on hers. The more she stared at him, the more she realized there was something almost dangerous about his stillness. It was like watching a predator wait patiently for the right moment to strike. Then, without a word, James slowly extended his hand, pressing a small button on the wristband he wore. The action was smooth, deliberate, and completely calm. There was no fanfare, no dramatic gesture, just a subtle motion. Yet, when he pressed that button, something happened that no one could have predicted. A soft, mechanical hum filled the room. At first, it was barely noticeable, but then the air around Six seemed to pulse. The sudden change was almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make her body tense, her muscles seizing up as though an invisible force was pressing against her. She felt her heart race as her vision blurred for just a moment, and her knees buckled slightly. It was as though the ground beneath her had shifted, and she was struggling to stay upright. The sensation was disorienting. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before. Six gasped, stumbling back a step, her hand flying to her throat as if she couldn't breathe properly. The room seemed to close in on her, and she felt a wave of panic rise up inside her. What was happening? She looked up at James, who still hadn't moved. His face was calm, unbothered. There was no hint of satisfaction in his expression, no smirk. He was simply standing there, watching her as if he knew exactly what was going on. The truth hit her like a cold wave. She had underestimated him. The human she had tried to humiliate had just turned the tables. In that moment, Six realized she had made a grave mistake. She had thought the humans were weak, that they were no threat, that they could be crushed easily. But this, whatever this was far beyond anything she had anticipated. She couldn't even begin to understand what kind of weapon or technology James had used. But it was clear now that he wasn't someone to be underestimated. The room was silent again, but this time, it wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of realization. Six felt her breath return, but it came in short, shallow gasps. The pressure in the air slowly lifted, and the dizziness began to fade. But she wasn't the same anymore. She knew deep down that she had been outmatched in ways she couldn't explain, and that, more than anything, was what scared her. Six stood there, her legs shaking slightly as the strange pressure on her body finally faded. Her mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. She had faced countless battles and challenges in her life, but never had she been made to feel so small, so vulnerable. She had been an invincible force in her own mind, a creature who commanded respect, even fear. But now, standing before this human officer, she felt as though she had been stripped of all that power. She struggled to regain her composure, straightening her posture as much as possible, but the unease didn't leave her. It lingered in the back of her mind, gnawing at her confidence. What had he done? What was that strange technology he had used on her? Her golden eyes flicked toward the rest of the council, who were watching with a mix of confusion, curiosity, and disbelief. The atmosphere had shifted. The powerful Xerian representative had been brought to her knees by a simple, human gesture. The other delegates, who had been silently observing the confrontation, began to murmur among themselves. The feeling in the room had changed. It was no longer just about Six's words. It was about something much bigger. The realization that perhaps humanity wasn't the insignificant species they had all assumed. Six's confidence, once so solid, now seemed fragile. She had never been in a situation like this before. She was used to being the one in control, to being the one who dictated the terms of engagement. Yet here she was, standing in the middle of the room, uncertain of her next move. And all the while, James Harding remained calm, still, and unbothered. His expression hadn't changed, and his posture was as unwavering as ever. To Six's growing frustration, he hadn't even spoken a word. The silence between them was like a weight, pressing down on her. It was as if she was waiting for him to say something, anything that would reveal what he had just done, what he was capable of. But James didn't budge. He didn't gloat or boast about his actions. He didn't take pleasure in her discomfort. Instead, he remained silent, his gaze steady and unwavering. The more Six tried to regain control of the situation, the more she realized that she wasn't the one in charge anymore. The human had done something to her, something she didn't understand, and it had left her feeling exposed, vulnerable. It was the first time in her life that she felt like she had no power. And that feeling, that unsettling vulnerability, was something Six wasn't sure she knew how to deal with. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Six opened her mouth to speak. Her voice was shaky at first, betraying the uncertainty she was trying to hide. "What did you do?" she demanded, her words sharp but laced with a hint of fear. The entire room seemed to lean in, waiting for James to respond. But James, in his usual calm manner, simply shook his head. There was no anger in his movements, no mockery. He wasn't trying to provoke her. He wasn't trying to win the conversation with clever words. He was simply stating the obvious. "It's not what I did," he said, his voice low and controlled. "It's what humanity has done." The words hung in the air for a long moment, a statement that carried weight far beyond the immediate confrontation. The room went silent again, and the delegates from all corners of the galaxy could feel the truth of those words reverberating through them. Six, despite herself, felt the sting of realization. The humans had come late to the galaxy, yes, but they had come with something that no other species had: an unstoppable will. They had crossed the line and spat in the face of the universe's expectations. They had risen not by fear or domination, but by sheer force of will. And it was that will that had left Six standing there, uncertain and shaken. For the first time in her life, she realized that she was not invincible. And that was more terrifying than anything she had ever faced. The room was thick with tension, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Six stood there, shaken but trying to hold on to her remaining dignity, as the reality of the situation settled in. James had made it clear that he wasn't just some weak, easily manipulated human. No, he was something else entirely, something that defied the usual rules of the galaxy. And in that moment, Six realized that she wasn't just dealing with a human officer. She was facing an entire species that had already crossed boundaries in ways the galaxy had never imagined. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of the air vents and the quiet murmur of the council members as they exchanged looks. They were still processing what had just happened. For the first time in the history of the council, they were questioning everything they thought they knew about humans. James had not just shown them something new, he had shown them something terrifying. Six's mind raced. How could she have underestimated him? How could she have been so blind? She had assumed that all humans were alike, that they were just a young and relatively unimportant species in the grand scheme of the galaxy. But now, standing here, in front of this human who had effortlessly silenced her, Six understood that humanity was far more than anyone had given them credit for. She tried to gather her thoughts, to regain her composure, but the fear gnawed at her. It wasn't just about what James had done to her physically. It was the way he had exposed the truth of their species. The humans weren't like the others. They didn't rely on tricks or technology to bend the galaxy to their will. They relied on something deeper, something more fundamental. A kind of quiet, relentless power that came from their refusal to back down. It was that same strength, that same inner force that had allowed them to survive, to adapt, and to thrive even in the most hostile environments. The rest of the galaxy might use weapons, might rely on their superior technology or physical prowess. But humans had something else. It was their resilience. It was the way they could stand in the face of adversity and simply refuse to be broken. That, Six realized, was why humanity had the potential to change everything. She had no words. Her usual quick wit, her sharp tongue, and her ability to tear down her opponents had failed her. James, without a word, had shown the council that the humans were more than just a species to be dismissed. He had shown them that the power of will, the strength of a single human spirit, could be a force more powerful than anything they had ever encountered. The realization hit her harder than any insult. Six, for the first time in her life, didn't know what to say. She stood there, her thoughts jumbled, unsure of how to continue, how to salvage what was left of her reputation. The council, still watching in stunned silence, slowly began to shift. There was no more amusement in their eyes, no more disbelief. They were all looking at James Harding in a new light. A light that made Six feel smaller and smaller by the second. What had started as a simple verbal confrontation had turned into a moment that would change the way the galaxy viewed humanity forever. James had won, but he had done so without raising a single weapon, without even speaking a harsh word. It was a victory that wasn't just for him, but for every human out there who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. Finally, Six spoke, but it wasn't with the same arrogance or confidence she had shown before. It was quieter, more measured. "You've made your point, human," she said, her voice now tinged with reluctant respect. Perhaps humanity isn't as weak as I thought." It was a grudging acknowledgement, but it was enough. The rest of the council nodded, a silent agreement that the game had changed. James didn't smile, didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His silence had spoken louder than any words ever could. And as the room settled into a new kind of quiet, Six understood that she had just witnessed the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. The humans had crossed the line, and the galaxy would never be the same again.